Hans Wormhat, pretty touchy subject, especially today, but the truth is the truth, and this is one topic that I've always had instincts over, just never felt right, never made any sense. And so here's a comment. The indigenous people of America are falsely called African American today. And my response, that's certainly possible. The slave ships are BS. Thanks for the comment. And apparently the word slave comes from Slavic. And so here's just something that I always knew was fake. This is fake. This doesn't work. The logistics behind this, it doesn't work. How do you feed and give water to all these people? They would, hilariously enough, one of the big things that can wake you up to all sorts of different conspiracy is, where's the poop? You're telling me that this many people were just going poop and pee down here in this deck? They would all be dead. All of them would be dead by the time the trip was over. How do you get water to the guy way over in the corner? And food. All of these people are supposed to be starving. Are you telling me that they politely hand out the rations one to the other? How are they giving these people food and water? They claim that a lot of these people were chained up the entire time. Because of course people have the natural question, how could they possibly keep all of these people from rebelling? And they have some stories of slave rebellions or whatever, but they make up whatever story they want to tell you, and they'll just make up little excuses for things, but it doesn't answer the question. Oh, well, they kept them in check because they all were chained down. Okay, but if they're all chained down, how are you feeding them all and giving them all water and cleaning up their excrement? It doesn't make any sense. The very first time these drawings were shown to me, I just knew that they were BS. I liken it to the first time people talked to me about gravity. I knew that was BS. The first time people talked to me about the alleged ancient Egyptian stuff, they try to tell you it's chiseled. No, you can just tell that's BS. Same thing with the slave ship thing. The very first time somebody showed it to me, I could just tell this is BS. This isn't how real life works. It's a drawing. Yeah, that's not... The logistics do not work. How do you put all these people on here? And they know that they're going off to be enslaved. They would be fighting back. They're not just going to passively be put in this situation where they know that they're going to die and they're not going to fight back. So that's why they say, oh, well, they're all chained up. But if they're all chained up, how do you manage this without just all of them dying? Or such a huge percentage of them dying that it doesn't even make sense at that point. You're losing so many people that it doesn't make sense. You would just bring a lot less people and keep them separated and make sure that they survive. It's expensive to buy a slave. So look, these are just drawings. This is not proof of anything. They're just drawings, and that they want you to, I don't know, they wanted to have an explanation for where dark-skinned people came from. So they made up this hoax, this slave trade. I do agree that dark-skinned, what people call African Americans today, they probably started here in America, and the Native Americans, it's just a big hoax. I think the Native Americans, they took a certain group of people and they used them as a land grab. Okay, we're going to scatter you all throughout America and claim that you people were the native people here. And then they used them in their psyops, and now they have them with the casinos and stuff. But yeah, I think they probably did take away what people call today black people. I really don't like that term, black people, white people. So I don't know, dark-skinned, light-skinned. I don't know if that's any better. I think that dark-skinned people have always been here in America, and maybe there is some truth to the Africa thing, African, because I believe that USA is ancient Egypt. So maybe America is like the real Africa. I don't know. Anyways, I don't know what else to say about this other than the logistics just don't work. How do you feed and water all of these people? Just think of how much food and water this amount of people would require. How do you fit all that on the ship? And then how do you distribute all of that to all these people? And then how do you clean up their excrement? It doesn't work. This is phony baloney. Just because somebody draws a picture doesn't mean that's what actually happened. Really, how do you feed and water this guy that's crammed up against the edge right there? How do you feed and water that guy? You think that you can hand some loaves of bread to these people and say, okay, now take off just a little hunk and then pass the bread all the way to Joe in the front over there? All of the people that are away from wherever they give the food and water, they would just all die because nobody would be handing their food and water off to the next slave. So all we get are those. Okay, how's there not a mutiny? These people are not tied up at all. And what, there's just one person with a sword? There would be mutiny instantly. Yeah, nobody would ever go down into the slave deck. If what they depict is reality, crammed in there like sardines, nobody would ever go down there. They would literally open the hatch, throw the food in there and the water in there, and then just close the hatch and be like, well, they'll figure it out. Because you would just be ripped to shreds if you went down there. These people would, I mean, so that's where they say that they're all shackled together. It doesn't, they'd still be trying to bite you and kick at you, and I don't understand how they could give food and give water and clean up the excrement of all these people. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because it's not reality. Wow, their clothes are really white. They're very well behaved. So they do tell us tales of mutiny every once in a while. I thought this was interesting. 3 feet, 3 inches in height, 33. They want you to think that they just had all these people. Look how ridiculous this drawing is. How did they get them crammed in there like that? And what, they're just going to the bathroom on top of one another? And you want me to believe that they survived the longer than a month journey crammed in like that? It's not believable. So they claim that it took like 21 to 90 day voyage. They would all be dead. They would be beating the crap out of these white people. I like how this guy gets why does this guy get a cool hammock thing? Okay, does this look believable? No. The owners of slave ships held as many enslaved people as possible, cramming, chaining, and grouping slaves to maximize space and make travel more profitable. But it's not profitable if they just all die. I've even had people comment before, well, they didn't care if they all died because when they got to the shore, they would just raise their prices because people died. That still doesn't make sense. You don't just let all of your cargo, which they love just calling these people cargo. You don't just let all of that die. That doesn't make sense. You would bring less so that you don't lose so much of your money. Because you have to pay for the slaves. You're not just going to pay for a bunch of slaves and then let half of them die. And so they're just selling you an emotional story. We have all sorts of psyops like this. They want you to believe in something, so they just make the story outrageously over the top, like sad and depressing for these people, and then they turn it around and make you feel like a bad person if you deny it. How rude of you. These people lost their lives. And it's like, well, you haven't proved that these people lost their lives. All you've done is shown me a drawing and told me that I'm a meanie because I don't believe it. Because I don't find these drawings convincing. And in my mind, it doesn't make any sense. The logistics of cramming hundreds of people into a deck of a ship that are going to be sold off for slavery, it just doesn't make sense. Here's a really interesting story. The Wikipedia article, they gave a reference to this person when it came to describing slave ship stuff. There's a lot of portraits of dark-skinned people, and they're wearing nice clothes from back in the day. So I think it's just, they just sell you this false notion of, I don't know how it used to be back then, but I've actually seen a decent amount of Victorian era. Even I have seen them on video, dark-skinned people dressed up nicely. So I don't know what race relations were exactly like back then, but I assume that the same sort of societal psyops that happened today were going on back then too. So the Wikipedia article on the slave trade mentioned this person, and then if you go farther in this person's thing, there's a controversy related to the memoir. And what's the controversy? So you can pause it if you want to read any of this. There's questions of the slave's account of being born in Africa. According to Coretta, Aquino Vasa's baptismal record and a naval muster roll document him as from South Carolina. What do you know? This person, there's documentation of this person being born in South Carolina, and they have this crazy tale of being on a slave ship. And guess what? Liars have always been around, and people want to make up fantastical tales and get you to believe in them. And that's what this whole earth is just a bunch of phonies that... How many stories out there? Oh, wow, that's such a fantastic story. It's because it's just fantastical. People are just making up stories and making you believe in it. You're surrounded by these liars. Nobody would choose to do this. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the sailors on slave ships were poorly paid, subject to brutal discipline and treatment. Furthermore, a crew mortality rate of around 20%. Honestly, a lot of times more crew ends up dying than slaves, percentage-wise, which again doesn't make any sense. Why would the crew be dying at a higher rate than the slaves? Disease, flogging, or slave uprisings. This doesn't look like a slave ship to me. It just looks like a nice... Why would you take such a nice ship and let 500 people poop and pee all over one of the... It would wreck the ship in one voyage. The ship would be wrecked in one voyage. These people would be breaking the ship while they're sitting there chained. They have nothing to do. They would be sitting there dragging their iron chains on the wood, carving into it, and whatever. They would try to break the ship. There's no way that they would cram 500 people onto a deck of this and the ship wouldn't just be destroyed after one voyage from all the poop and pee and people just breaking the ship. So I'm going to keep this as a preliminary thing. So here, look, she had embarked 265 slaves and she disembarked 235 for a loss rate of 11%. Of the crew, 12 had died. So way more crew died percentage-wise, over a quarter. Over 25% of the crew allegedly died, and only 11% of the slaves died. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. It's a made-up story. So this was just a different... I don't know which article this was, but I saw a lot of 33 stuff, of course. Of 22 new possible wrecks identified, 11 were identified as candidates. 22, 11, 33. There's actually quite a few fantastical stories of slave uprisings, different accounts on slave ships, and they're full of little details. And oftentimes that's a big key, I don't know, you can just tell that something is made up when there's an incredible amount of detail for events that were supposedly happening 200 years ago. And yet it's like they have a play-by-play. It's like they have a minute-by-minute play of what happened. And to me, that's just a big red flag. Something I always bring up is you can go study Jack the Ripper, and you will just be amazed at all the details that people have for this thing that happened hundreds of years ago. And it's because it's BS. When you can just make up whatever BS you want, you're gonna get all sorts of details out of thin air. And it becomes absurd at a certain point. How do we have all this information for something that happened hundreds of years ago? And yet today it's hard to find any straight information on things that are happening today. Anyways, same as it ever was. There was a lot of talk about business stuff, taking out insurance on the lives of enslaved people. Ships' surgeons were typically involved in selecting slaves for purchase in Africa, so their medical expertise supported the determination of commodity value for a captive. If the surgeon rejected a captive, that individual suffered commercial death, being of no value, and was liable to be killed by the African traders. Just made up sob stories. If a large percentage of your people are going to just die on board anyways, what's the point of sitting there and scrutinizing these people with a surgeon? There was this, probably just some psyop back in the days of, this was about the Civil War era. Some of the last slave ships, I was just looking at those. And it's like people knew about it. You ever know about, I mean, there's all sorts of news stories. They love doing this. They try to pretend like something's a secret, but somehow everybody knows about it. If everybody knows about it, it's not a secret. They're just trying to pretend it's like this reverse psychology thing. The Streisand effect, I guess, back in some stories will catch on even faster because people try to pretend like it's an unknown thing, but it's not unknown. This ship was supposed to be clandestine slave operation, going to get slaves but pretending like they're not, but it's like everybody knew. When the Wanderer stopped in Charleston, South Carolina on its way to Africa, its mission was so well known that it was greeted with a cannon salute. So I just thought this was interesting. This is something that I see a lot, where people try to pretend like something's unknown, but it's clearly a known thing. Okay, so built slave pens later. Many of the people died on the 6-week journey, of course. Thought it was kind of weird. They came to Jekyll Island, delivering 409 enslaved people alive. Yeah, it's tied in with the Civil War. I thought this was interesting. The slaves who arrived in the United States on Wanderer gained a celebrity status, almost like this was some sort of media sensation, a planned media event. The tendency of newspapers and private correspondents to identify the slaves in this way suggests there was no other known large-scale importations of African. Or it just means that this is a psyop, and so they wanted to keep bringing it up in people's minds. Oh, they were a wanderer slave. The very last ship, allegedly, that brought slaves brought 110 surviving slaves, and 11 is a big Masonic number. 11 for the 2 pillars. So this is just talking about one of those very last slave ships that ever sailed. Brought 9,000 in gold for the purchase of slaves. He offered to buy some 125 Africans for $100 each. The math doesn't add up there, but whatever. He described meeting an African prince and being taken to the king's court where he observed some religious practices. It's kind of interesting. Having agreeably transacted affairs with the prince, we went to the warehouse where they had in confinement 4,000 captives in a state of nudity, from which they gave me liberty to select 125 as mine offering to brand them for me. I just don't believe it that they had 4,000 naked people in a warehouse somewhere. Again, just the logistics aren't believable. So there was some crazy story. As the slaves were being loaded, Foster saw 2 streamers off the port and ordered the crew to leave immediately, although only 110 slaves had been secured on board. So the very last slave ship had 100% survival rate. That's fantastic. I don't know where they say about there were 110, but 110 were only on board because allegedly 15 ran away at the last second, because they were about to get caught. So once this very last slave ship came to port, he allegedly transferred the slaves to a river steamboat, then burned Clotilda to the water's edge before sinking it. Wouldn't ships be very expensive? I don't understand the reasoning behind, to destroy all the evidence. But once you've gotten the slaves here, I mean, what's the point? I really don't understand the point of burning a perfectly good ship. It just seems like a BS story. At best, captives were fed beans, corn, yams, rice, and palm oil. Slaves were fed one meal a day with water, if at all. When food was scarce, slaveholders would get priority over the slaves. So again, how are they distributing this food to all of the slaves? There's no physical way to do that. The slaves that are farther away from where you're distributing this food and water, they would just die because nobody would be passing off their food and water to them. The stronger slaves would be beating the crap out of the weaker ones and stealing their food and water rations. It would just be complete chaos. The survival rates would be basically zero. It would not be profitable, and they just wouldn't do it this way. It's not a believable story. It never was a believable story. You can't live for months in those conditions. And they can just write stories about it and make you believe in stories about it, but it can't actually happen in real life. Okay, so here you go. The monetary value of enslaved Africans on any given American auction block during the mid-18th century ranged between $800 and $1,200, which in modern times would be equivalent to $32,000 to $48,000 per person. You don't take something that's $32,000 and pack them in like sardines and just say, well, whatever, most of them are going to die. But I mean, really, they didn't even have most of them die, which doesn't make sense. The conditions were so terrible that it would be a more than 50% would die easily. And I mean, they say a large number die, but just not nearly enough. And even if you believe the number that they say die, the money doesn't make sense. They would not allow that many to die. That's so much money just being thrown in the ocean, allegedly. Therefore, ship captains and investors sought technologies that would protect their human cargo. No. See how they'll just say whatever BS they want in the moment? They can make so many conflicting statements. This paragraph right here just completely conflicts everything that they ever tell you about the slave trade. So anyways, that's it for this video. Yes, I do agree that African Americans, dark-skinned people, they're the true natives to America, most likely. And the Native Americans, it's probably just one tribe of people that they used in the Psyop for a huge land grab. Oh, we're gonna pretend like you people were the natives. It's just like a controlled opposition. They had control over these native people. I don't know, it's just one tribe. They all look very similar, all the different native people. So they took these people and they've used them to do a huge land grab. Anyways, that's just my theory on it. Hope you enjoyed the video. God bless everyone.